obunabbi is given by the Spirit of God. Buweebwa n'omwoyo wa Katonda. For prophecy, okuwa obunabbi is one of the gifts kyekimu ku birabo of God. Kyekimu ku birabo bya Katonda. Prophecy, obunabbi is given to reveal buweebwa okwolesa what lies ahead, ekiri mu maaso, that God's people, nti abantu ba Katonda may not perish, baleme okusaanawo. When we give a prophecy, bwe tuwa obunabbi, or when we prophesy, oba bwe tuwako obunabbi, it is not because we are powerful. Tekiri nti tuli b'amaanyi, no, nedda. Naye ye kabonero to show you, okulaga that God is real, nti Katonda wa ddala. Is a symbol, ke kabonero that shows you, akakulaga that there is danger ahead. Nti waliwo obulabe maaso. Jesus is real. Nti Yesu wa ddala. Still relates to his chosen ones. Akyakolagana n'abalonde be to speak to generation, okwogera eri emigigi for the salvation of souls, olw'obulokozi bw'emmeeme.
Let us pray so much for the nation of Israel, because I saw USA turning its back against Israel. Yes, they will turn their back against them. This will heavily affect Israel. Yes, I saw Israel tearing apart and falling down with no one on their side. But USA, America, will be heavily affected by the consequences of betraying Israel.
Welcome to the NewsHour. There is a public break tonight between the United States and Israel after the U.S. refused to veto a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accused the U.S. of changing its position on the war in Gaza and canceled a planned visit of his top aides to Washington.
Let us pray so much for the nation of Israel, because I saw USA turning its back against Israel. Yes, they will turn their back against them.
We fully support some of the critical objectives in this non-binding resolution, and we believe it was important for the Council to speak out and make clear that our ceasefire any ceasefire must come with the release of all hostages.
But the resolution did not condition the ceasefire on the hostage release, nor did it condemn Hamas's terrorist attack of October the 7th. And that is why Netanyahu said today, hey, look, that's what you were calling for in your own draft resolution. You have changed your policy. That led to Netanyahu canceling this delegation that was supposed to arrive tomorrow to Washington. And it led to this statement by Israeli ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan.
Your demand for a ceasefire without conditioning it on the release of the hostages not only is not helpful, but it undermines the efforts to secure their release. To this council, Israeli blood is cheap. This is a travesty, and I'm disgusted.
Let us pray so much for the nation of Israel, because I saw USA turning its back against Israel. Yes, they will turn their back against them.
We get to decide what our policy is. The Prime Minister's office seems to be indicating through public statements that we somehow changed here. We haven't. And we get to decide what our policy is. It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that.
Let us pray so much for the nation of Israel, because I saw USA turning its back against Israel. Yes.
ye
They will turn their back against them.
bagenda kubakyukira bagenda bakyukiza omugongo.
Let's turn to West Asia now. A very important alliance is reaching its breaking point. The one between Israel and the US. It's been a rock-solid one, an alliance that has shaped modern West Asia. But the Gaza war could snap it. On Monday, the United Nations Security Council voted on a new ceasefire proposal. Now, normally, the US would have vetoed it, but this time they did not. 14 UNSC members supported the resolution and the United States abstained. So the ceasefire resolution was passed. It was the first since the war broke out in October. And what does this resolution say? Well, broadly, it says three things. One, a ceasefire during the month of Ramadan. Two, the release of all hostages held by Hamas. And three, more aid shipments to Gaza. Now, in the past, the US had opposed all such resolutions. They vetoed 3 of them in 6 months. So what has changed now? What has changed is the situation in Gaza. Some 32,000 Palestinians have been killed. Almost 70% of the victims are women and children, plus humanitarian aid is drying up. Most of Gaza is on the brink of famine. So Joe Biden is feeling the pressure. Arab nations are asking him to change his position. Muslim Americans are abandoning him. So the US decided to abstain from voting. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is quite upset with Biden. In fact, listen to his statement. I'm quoting, "The United States has abandoned its policy in the United Nations today. This resolution will harm both the war effort and the effort to release the hostages." But Washington does not see it that way. They say their policy is unchanged.
We're kind of perplexed by this. The Prime Minister's office seems to be indicating through public statements that we somehow changed here. We haven't. And we get to decide what our policy is.
Let us pray so much
Leka tusabe nnyo
for the nation of Israel,
tusabire nnyo eggwanga lya Israel
because I saw
kubanga nalabye
USA turning its back against Israel.
kubanga nalabye Amerika ng'ekyukira Isirayiri.
Yes.
Ye
They will turn their back against them.
bagenda kubakyukira bagenda bakyukiza omugongo.
This will heavily affect Israel.
Kakino kigenda kukosa nnyo Isirayiri.
Yes.
Ye
I saw Israel tearing apart
nalabye Isirayiri ng'eyulikamu
and falling down
ng'era ng'egwa wansi
with no one on their side.
nga tewali ali ku luuyi lwabwe.
So the US is changing its policy, but they say they're not. Will Netanyahu play along is the question. An Israeli delegation was supposed to visit the US this week, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has cancelled it. His defense minister also said the war will continue, meaning no ceasefire in Gaza. But can Israel really do that? Can they ignore a United Nations Security Council resolution? UN officials say they cannot. Israel is a member of the United Nations, therefore all UNSC resolutions are binding on them. But the United States has a different idea. They say this resolution is non-binding.
So with respect to the first resolution, it is our interpretation of this resolution that it is non-binding. For any detail on that, I would refer you to the office of our ambassador to the United Nations, who can, of course, speak in more detail of how we reached that conclusion.
Let us pray so much
Leka tusabe nnyo
for the nation of Israel
tusabire nnyo eggwanga lya Israel
because I saw
kubanga nalabye
USA turning its back against Israel.
kubanga nalabye Amerika ng'ekyukira Isirayiri.
Yes.
Ye
They will turn their back against them.
bagenda kubakyukira bagenda bakyukiza omugongo.
This will heavily affect Israel.
Kakino kigenda kukosa nnyo Isirayiri.
Yes.
Ye
I saw Israel tearing apart
nalabye Isirayiri ng'eyulikamu
and falling down
ng'era ng'egwa wansi
with no one on their side.
nga tewali ali ku luuyi lwabwe.
By December, the US had sent some 230 cargo planes and 20 ships to Israel. And what was in these shipments? 21,000 precision-guided munitions, thousands of bunker busters, 200 kamikaze drones, 57,000 artillery shells, and 15,000 bombs. All of this in less than 6 months. So the takeaway is quite clear. Israel may be fighting the war in Gaza, but their weapons are American. If Joe Biden cuts off those shipments, Israel will struggle. They may defeat Hamas in Gaza, but they will struggle to replenish their arsenal. So it's a big lever for Joe Biden. The question is, will he use it?
I saw Israel tearing apart and falling down with no one on their side.
A lot of countries have stopped military aid to Israel already, like Spain, Canada, the Netherlands, and Japan. All of them are American allies. Some US Democrats are also pushing for it. They're asking the president to cut off military aid. Having said that, it's still a nuclear option. Biden would be up against decades of US policy and tradition. But at this rate, who knows? Netanyahu is famous for pushing American presidents to the brink. We'll have to wait and see how Biden handles him.